Right now, at this moment, something is already in motion over the central United States, and if you have family in Dallas-Fort Worth, Oklahoma City, or Little Rock, it is worth understanding what is building across this region before Friday arrives. This is not a distant forecast set for some future week. The first wave of this system is moving now, and the ground in Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas is being set up for a sequence that forecasters are watching with the kind of attention they reserve for significant multi-day events. A sequence of storm systems is moving through the same region back to back, and each one arrives on ground that the previous one already weakened and soaked. Stay with me, because in the next several minutes we're going to walk through this storm day by day, state by state, and I will tell you exactly which communities are facing the most dangerous window this weekend, and why most storm coverage is stopping short of the full picture. Here is the question that NWS forecasters have been focused on all week. Why is Friday night specifically the window everyone is pointing to? Not Thursday, not Saturday morning, Friday night. Why does that particular window carry more weight than the others? That answer is coming. But to understand it, you need to understand something about the land itself, something that most weather coverage skips right over, because in this part of the country, the risk does not begin when the rain gets heavy. The conditions that shape how serious it becomes are already in place before the first drop falls. In the next several minutes, we're going to cover the full arc of this event. We will start with what makes this specific terrain so different from anywhere else in the country. We will move through the timeline day by day from Wednesday into the following week. We will spend real time on Friday night and explain exactly why it is the point where everything that built up earlier in the week comes together. We will follow the storm as it shifts east on Saturday and pulls Tennessee, Western Kentucky, and Mississippi into a situation they were not part of in the early headlines. And we will talk honestly about what happens after the weekend. Because this storm does not end on Sunday, and that is the part of this week that most people are going to be caught off guard by. The states in the direct path of the first and heaviest rounds are Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Missouri. As the weekend unfolds, Tennessee, Western Kentucky, and northern Mississippi become part of the story in a way that deserves their own full chapter. If you are in those states and have been thinking this event does not apply to you, it does, and the timing of when it applies to you specifically is important. Stay with me through the full picture. Now, here is what most people watching storm coverage this week are focusing on. They are watching the rain totals, they are checking the radar loop. What the forecasters who know this region best are watching is something else entirely. They are watching the ground. They are watching what that ground has already absorbed, what it can no longer absorb, and what happens to the water when the ground simply says no more. The reason this week is different from a typical storm warning has nothing to do with how much rain falls. It has everything to do with where it falls, and what the land does with it in the next several minutes. The soil across the Texas hill country is thin, sitting over hard limestone bedrock, and the practical meaning of that, in the context of a rainstorm, is direct and plain. Water does not soak in the way it soaks into a forest floor or deep farmland. When rain falls on hardpan at any meaningful rate, the ground does not absorb it and hold it. It redirects it. The water moves sideways almost immediately, and it moves toward whatever low point is closest. In the hill country, those low points are the creek systems: Barton Creek, Onion Creek, the Llano River drainage, the Pedernales. These are not wide, they are slow rivers with broad floodplains that give communities time to prepare. They are narrow, fast, and carved through resistant rock. When rain pours onto that limestone and thin clay surface, those creeks respond in minutes. That word is worth sitting with for a moment. Not hours, the time frame most people associate with flood warnings. Not days, the time frame of a major river rising to a dangerous stage. Minutes, that is the clock the hill country operates on. And it is a very different clock than the rest of the central US flood story runs on. The same principle applies when you move north into the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas and Missouri. The Ozarks are a landscape of ridges and hollows. Rain that falls on those ridges has nowhere to go except down into the creek systems below. The White River, the Buffalo River, and the tributaries feeding the Arkansas River from the north all respond fast. And they do not always give visible warning at the bank before the water arrives from the ridges above. Most storm coverage focuses on the rain total, the overall measurement of how much rain is expected across a given area over a given time. That number matters, but the sequence of when those storms arrive matters just as much. The spacing between rounds, whether the ground has had any time to drain between events, even partially, or whether each new round arrives on a surface that has already been fully pushed past its capacity. A given volume of rainfall landing on dry soil over 3 days is a manageable situation. That same volume landing in the same sequence on ground that has already been through 2 rounds of sustained heavy rain is a different situation entirely. The ground reaches a threshold where it stops accepting new input, and once that threshold passes, every additional drop of rain becomes immediate runoff, fully, directly, without delay. Here is what makes this specific week different from a single storm event. Central Texas has been in drought conditions going into this week. That matters, not because dry soil makes the first round worse, but because that thin layer of limestone soil saturates faster than deep farmland does. Wednesday's first round of rain will use up whatever small buffer the ground has left. By the time Friday's heavier system arrives, that buffer is gone. Every drop that falls goes directly into the nearest creek, immediately, without delay. Meanwhile, at the start of this week, the major rivers in this corridor, the Red River along the Texas-Oklahoma border, the Arkansas River through central Arkansas, were running at below normal levels following the preceding dry stretch. That sounds like good news, and in a narrow sense it is. Yeah, because those larger rivers have physical room to accept inflow before reaching flood stage. But here is what that framing misses. The story of this week is not primarily about those major rivers in the early days. The story is about what happens upstream of them, in the hill country creek systems, in the Ozark tributaries, in the small stream networks that respond first and fastest. Those smaller waterways are where the danger concentrates early. And those are the waterways that most mainstream storm coverage is not spending enough time on as this week begins. There are communities positioned along those smaller waterways that do not have the same warning lead time as a major city on a large river. A city like Little Rock, sitting on the Arkansas River, benefits from a long chain of upstream monitoring that gives emergency managers hours, sometimes days, of advance notice before significant flooding arrives at the city's doorstep. A small town positioned on a hill country creek 10 miles from its headwaters may have a warning window measured in 30 to 45 minutes under an active storm. The creek may look calm while heavy rain is falling miles upstream, and the rise can arrive quickly with little visible warning. This is not a guess. It reflects the documented behavior of these specific waterways, repeated in multiple prior events, confirmed in the historical records maintained by USGS gauge networks across the region. This week, those same waterways are being asked to handle not one round of that kind of rainfall, they are being asked to handle a sequence, so when Wednesday arrives and the first cells begin building over North Texas, the land is already part of the story. Not as a passive backdrop, as an active participant, and what happens to the ground over the next 48 hours will determine the shape of everything that follows. What Wednesday and Thursday bring to this region is not just rainfall, it is the setup, and what follows that setup is what this week is really about. Wednesday arrives, and the first wave of this system is already organised and moving across North Texas. Dallas-Fort Worth sits in the entry path of a sustained moisture stream that has been building and pushing northward, and the atmosphere above the metro is loaded with the kind of energy that produces organised, slow-moving storm clusters rather than isolated afternoon showers. The NWS Storm Prediction Center, the specialised team within the National Weather Service dedicated specifically to tracking and communicating severe weather risk across the continental US, has already issued a Level 2 slight risk designation over northeast Texas and the surrounding region for this opening phase. That designation places this first round above the threshold of routine spring rain. It tells you something is organised, something has structure, and that the first chapter of this week is meaningful on its own terms, not just as a preview of what comes after. The rain that falls over the Dallas-Fort Worth corridor on Wednesday carries a specific concern beyond total accumulation. The rate of rainfall within individual storm cells matters here as much as the daily total. Bursts of heavy rainfall in a short window move through the city's drainage system differently than the same amount spread evenly over 12 hours. North Texas has extensive impervious cover. The highways, the commercial areas, the miles of parking lot and rooftop that direct water outward and downhill rather than inward and down into the soil. The bayous and concrete-lined drainage channels that carry that water through the metro toward the Trinity River system can absorb a steady input. They struggle with a sudden, concentrated burst. On Wednesday, the concern is not a steady, widespread soaking. It is the individual cells embedded in the system that can drop concentrated rain on a single drainage basin in a short time frame. Through Wednesday night and into Thursday, the system continues its northeast movement. the focus shifts and expands. Northeast Texas, moving toward the Piney Woods region, receives prolonged rainfall into the overnight hours. By mid-Thursday, even the greater absorption capacity of that region is being reduced. The soil moisture is climbing steadily, and in the smaller creek drainages east of Dallas, water is already moving at above normal rates toward the streams that feed the Sabine and Sulphur rivers. Thursday also delivers the first significant rainfall into central and western Arkansas. The Ouachita Mountains and the terrain flanking the upper Arkansas River Valley begin receiving measurable rain through Thursday afternoon. Stream gauges in the upper reaches of the Illinois River, the Mulberry River, and the Buffalo River in northern Arkansas begin their upward movement. The shifts are not dramatic on Thursday. No creeks are threatening at this stage. But the NWS river forecast centers that monitor these basins are watching those numbers carefully, because the opening movement on a river gauge tells part of the story of where that gauge will be 48 hours later when the next heavier round arrives. What is happening on Wednesday and Thursday, taken on its own, would produce a weather event that generates local news coverage and some street flooding in the usual low-lying spots. That is what a standalone first-round event looks like in this corridor. The reason this week is different is what is building simultaneously in the atmosphere to the west. The second system, larger, more energetically organised, and carrying a more substantial moisture load than the first, is already forming. It is not arriving Wednesday, it is not arriving Thursday, it is timing itself for Friday. And the ground that Wednesday and Thursday soak, the stream gauges that Wednesday and Thursday start rising, are the base condition that second system will land on. There is a lag in this process that forecasters track closely, and that most weather coverage does not explain clearly. When heavy rain falls on a watershed, even after the rain stops, the streams and rivers do not immediately reach their peak response. The water that fell on the ridges has to collect in the hollows, move into the branches, enter the main creek channel, and then travel downstream to the gauge point. That journey takes time. Depending on the size of the watershed and the gradient of the terrain, the peak stream response to a rainfall event can arrive 6, 12, or even 20 hours after the heaviest precipitation ends, which means some of what falls on Thursday night is still moving through the stream systems of northeast Texas and western Arkansas when Friday evening arrives. And that moving water, already in the channel, already committed, will merge with the new rainfall from Friday's storm. Not sequentially, simultaneously. That is the mechanism that makes Friday night different from Wednesday. And the stream systems that are already elevated by Thursday night are the ones that will respond the fastest and climb the highest when the second and heavier system arrives. By Thursday night, the Dallas-Fort Worth area has absorbed a meaningful opening round. The Ozark tributary systems in northern Arkansas have begun their upward movement. The atmosphere to the west is already organising the next chapter. Wednesday and Thursday are serious. But the forecasters most closely watching this event are not focused on Wednesday. They are pointed at Friday night, and the reason why, once you understand it fully, changes the way you watch everything that comes next. By Friday evening, the conditions that forecasters have been watching all week come together in one window. Not Friday morning, not Saturday afternoon. Friday night, moving into the early hours of Saturday, is the moment when the single heaviest storm system of this entire sequence arrives, and it arrives on terrain that has been continuously absorbing rain for 2 days, in a landscape where the small creeks and fast-draining watersheds are already running at elevated rates with a ground surface that has spent the prior 48 hours steadily losing the capacity it had to buffer any new input. Dallas, Fort Worth, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Little Rock. These 4 metro areas sit in the direct path of what the NWS Storm Prediction Center has been identifying as the peak risk window of this event, and they are not sitting there alone. Around each of those cities, in every direction, are the smaller communities, the suburban towns near creek crossings, the rural communities along tributary corridors, the low-lying neighbourhoods that sit in the drainage path between one watershed and the next. Those communities do not have the warning infrastructure of a major metro. Their local gauge networks may be less dense, their emergency management resources are spread thinner, and their warning time on a fast-rising small stream is shorter. So when the conversation about Friday night focuses on the 4 named cities, what it is actually describing is a much wider geography of communities that those cities represent. Think carefully about what the ground looks like on Friday evening. The first round came through Wednesday and continued into Thursday. The soil across northeast Texas and eastern Oklahoma absorbed what it could in those first hours. some areas managed a fraction of meaningful early absorption. But as Wednesday night moved to Thursday, and as Thursday moved to Thursday night, that capacity was being spent. By Friday morning, the soil moisture content across the primary storm corridor has climbed to a level where the ground is not a meaningful buffer anymore. The equation that governs what happens to new rainfall has changed. On Wednesday, when heavy rain fell, the ground could still take some of it. By Friday night, the calculation is simple and stark. Every drop of rain that falls goes directly into the nearest drainage, immediately, fully, without the delay that comes from soil absorption. The creeks that were already running fast from Wednesday and Thursday's contribution now receive the full weight of the week's largest system without any ground-level buffering left beneath them. The NWS Storm Prediction Center's assessment of the Friday system's parameters shows the kind of atmospheric structure that produces training thunderstorms, organized clusters where new storm cells develop and move over areas that earlier cells just crossed, depositing concentrated rainfall in a narrow corridor rather than distributing it broadly across a wide region. When that kind of storm structure occurs over the Texas Hill Country drainage networks or over the Ozark adjacent terrain of eastern Oklahoma and western Arkansas, the creek response can accelerate in ways that even well-calibrated models can underestimate. The gauge readings can climb sharply in short windows. The time between a stream starting to rise and a stream leaving its banks, which was already compressed in these fast-responding landscapes, compresses further when the rainfall rate is high and the ground is fully saturated. Layered on top of the flooding threat on Friday night is something that elevates this window from a rain event to a multi-hazard situation. The NWS Storm Prediction Center has identified severe thunderstorm parameters as part of the Friday evening and overnight picture for Dallas-Fort Worth, Oklahoma City, and Tulsa. Large hail is in the parameter set for these areas. Damaging winds are part of the signature for the storm cells expected Friday night. This is not a steady, quiet rainfall event where the danger is purely the accumulation of water. These are organized, energetic thunderstorm clusters moving through a region that is simultaneously flood-primed. The combination of severe storm structure with flood-saturated ground is precisely the convergence that puts this window in a different category than any single hazard event. For the smaller tributary communities, the towns positioned along the streams that feed the Arkansas River from its northern drainage, the communities in the lowlands below the Ozark ridges in Missouri and Arkansas, Friday night is the moment their local gauges begin telling a story that Wednesday and Thursday did not prepare them for. These are the waterways that respond fastest and give communities the shortest warning window. A creek in these systems can begin a significant rise before a downstream community has had time to process what the upstream gauge is already showing. This is why NWS offices covering these regions have been working with local emergency managers ahead of Friday's arrival, not as a precaution alone, but as a recognition that the lead time available in these fast-responding systems is limited, and that coordination before the event matters more than communication during it. There is also a dimension to Friday night that belongs specifically to what Friday night means on a human calendar, the work week ends. People who have been home all week begin moving, heading out for the evening, picking up family members, making the usual Friday commitments that put people on roads, in cars, across creek crossings that may look completely normal at 6 in the evening. Friday evening is a time when more people are on roads, including those who may not be familiar with how quickly local creeks can rise. The combination of low-light conditions, active thunderstorm structure, and fast-rising streams in a landscape where a road crossing that looked dry at sunset can carry moving water within a few hours under the right storm conditions is a combination that has historically produced situations that could have been avoided with earlier awareness. This is the human texture of a Friday night flood event on saturated terrain, and it is different in character from a midday event that people can see developing around them. If you're watching this right now from Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee, or Kentucky, drop your state in the comments below. I genuinely want to know who is watching from the path of this storm. Your comment also helps me understand which communities to focus on in my updates through the weekend, because I will be posting updates as this event unfolds. Or hit the like button if this breakdown is already giving you detail you have not found in other coverage. It helps this information reach more people in the path of these systems, and if you're not subscribed, now is the moment to do that. I will have a full update posted by Saturday, timed specifically before Friday night's most dangerous window arrives. You need to see that update before Friday evening, not after. The Red River, running along the Texas-Oklahoma border and flowing southeast, is also beginning to receive its first serious inflow contribution from this event on Friday. The Red River does not respond with the speed of a hill country creek. Its basin is large, and it takes sustained input over a wide area before the main channel climbs to levels that affect the communities along its banks. But Friday night is the night that input begins in earnest. The tributary streams feeding the Red from the north and south are delivering the accumulated runoff of Wednesday and Thursday, while simultaneously receiving Friday's new addition. What the Red River ultimately does in the days that follow, whether it moves through its corridor at elevated but manageable levels, or whether it climbs toward the range that affects Texarkana and communities in the lower basin, will be shaped significantly by how much rain actually falls in its watershed on Friday and Saturday. By Saturday morning, forecasters expect to be reading stream gauge data from northeast Texas, eastern Oklahoma, and the Arkansas River watershed that reflects the full weight of what Friday night produced. Some gauges will show overnight rises that are sharp and fast. Now, some streams that were elevated but stable on Thursday will be at or near their crest by early Saturday. And by the time most people in this corridor wake up Saturday and look at the news, the storm energy that produced Friday night's peak will have already moved. But it will not have stopped. It will have shifted. And where it shifts next is a part of this story that most of the early coverage missed entirely. By Saturday morning, two different situations are developing at the same time across different parts of the country. And that geographic split is one of the defining characteristics of this particular storm sequence. In Texas and Oklahoma, the worst of the atmospheric energy has moved east. The skies are beginning to clear in some places, but clearing skies does not mean the flood threat has cleared. The streams that rose sharply on Friday night are still moving, and still carrying the accumulated input of 3 days of rainfall, still delivering their elevated flows downstream toward the larger rivers. Emergency managers across northeast Texas and eastern Oklahoma are not standing down on Saturday morning. They are monitoring the aftermath of what Friday night produced and managing the situations that developed overnight. The creeks are not done. The rivers downstream of those creeks are still rising in some locations. The work of Friday night is still playing out on Saturday in the form of water in motion. At the same time, the storm system that drove Friday night's most intense conditions has pushed east, and as it moves, it carries its energy to a set of states that, up to this point in the week, have been watching this event from the outside. By Saturday morning and through Saturday afternoon, the leading edge of that system aligns across western Tennessee, western Kentucky, northern Mississippi, and western Arkansas. This is the moment, for people in Memphis, for communities along the lower tributaries of the Tennessee River system, for the river towns of western Kentucky, when their own chapter of this week begins. Memphis sits directly in the zone where Saturday's system is most active. The city's position on the Mississippi makes the main channel river level essentially a non-story for Saturday. The Mississippi responds over such a long timeline and through such a massive basin that a single weekend of rain upstream does not register quickly at Memphis. But the tributaries that flow through and near Memphis tell a different story. The Wolf River, moving through the northern part of the metro, and the Non-Conner Creek corridor through the southern suburbs, are smaller systems that respond more directly to local and near-local rainfall. When heavy rain falls on the Memphis metro and its immediate surroundings on Saturday, those systems respond faster than the Mississippi gauge does. Low-lying neighborhoods that sit along those corridors are the areas to watch on Saturday afternoon and evening. Further north, the communities of western Kentucky, south of Paducah, along the lower reaches of the Tennessee River system, and in the bottomlands near the confluence of the Cumberland and Tennessee rivers, are receiving their first significant rainfall of this event on Saturday. Their situation is different from what northeast Texas experienced on Wednesday in one important sense. Their ground does not carry the thin limestone and clay character of the hill country. But it is early March, and soil in western Kentucky at this time of year often carries a moisture base from the winter and early spring that reduces available buffer below what summer or fall conditions would offer. Saturday's system is not landing on parched ground in Kentucky. It is landing on a landscape that has less surplus capacity than a surface reading might suggest. The Tennessee River tributaries are the specific hydrological focus on Saturday for the region east of the Mississippi. The rivers that drain into the Tennessee from the south and west, moving through northern Mississippi and western Tennessee before reaching the main stem, begin their response to Saturday's rainfall through the afternoon. These tributaries operate on the same general principle as the Ozark systems. Rainfall collects over a broad upland area, funnels into defined channels, and arrives at the main river in concentrated flows that don't always telegraph well at the main channel level until they are close. The Tennessee Valley Authority maintains extensive monitoring infrastructure for this river system, and their gauge network will be actively tracking Saturday's event. But the smaller tributaries will move before the main Tennessee shows any significant change, and for communities positioned along those smaller systems, Saturday afternoon is the window that requires attention. Western Arkansas occupies a unique position on Saturday, and it is worth understanding specifically. Unlike Tennessee and Kentucky, Western Arkansas is not receiving its first round of rain on Saturday. It has already absorbed the early rounds of the event through Wednesday and Thursday. The creeks in northwest Arkansas, the Illinois River moving through the Washington and Benton County drainage, the Mulberry River system, and the upper tributaries of the Arkansas River, these waterways are already running at above normal levels coming into Saturday. When Saturday's eastward pushing system adds its new rainfall onto western Arkansas, it is not starting from zero. It is adding to an already elevated system. The Arkansas River's upper reaches, receiving runoff from both the Ozark terrain above and the Oklahoma tributaries to the northwest, are accumulating input from multiple directions simultaneously. The gauge at Fort Smith, where those contributions converge before moving southeast toward Little Rock, will be one of the most watched data points across the entire Saturday picture. There is also a detail about the character of Saturday's storm movement that carries real consequence for where the most concentrated rain falls. The speed at which a storm system moves through a region directly affects the total rainfall any one location receives. A fast-moving system spreads its output across a wider path. A system that slows, stalls, or trains over a specific area deposits far more rain in a smaller footprint. The NWS offices covering Tennessee and Kentucky are tracking the movement speed of Saturday's system carefully. Whether it moves through briskly or slows as it interacts with the terrain of the Tennessee Valley will be among the most consequential forecast details of the weekend. And while all of that is happening across Tennessee and Kentucky on Saturday, while those communities are getting their first heavy round and western Arkansas absorbs its second, the weather pattern driving this week's storms has not fully cleared. Forecasters are tracking the possibility of additional rain returning to the region through early next week, and by Sunday, something begins to build again in the corridor that has already been through 3 days of heavy rain. That is the part of this week that most people have not heard yet. Most people watching an event like this carry an assumption that shapes how they track it. Most people assume a weekend storm ends when the weekend does. This week is different. NOAA's extended forecast discussion, issued at the beginning of this week, or explicitly flagged the period between Sunday and Tuesday as a window of continued active and potentially significant weather for the same corridor that has been absorbing rainfall since Wednesday. Additional rounds of heavy rain are forecast to move through this region, not after a meaningful recovery period, not after the rivers have had time to recede and the ground has had time to drain, but on top of the saturated, elevated, already fully stressed landscape that 4 days of prior rainfall has created. That sequencing is the central reason why the Sunday through Tuesday window carries real concern in official forecast discussions, even though the individual storm systems in the second and third rounds are not necessarily larger than the first. The size of a storm is only part of what determines its impact. The other part is what it is landing on, and by Sunday, what it is landing on is a landscape where every creek is above its pre-event baseline, where every major river in the corridor is receiving sustained runoff from the rounds that preceded it, and where the ground across the primary corridor has essentially no meaningful buffering capacity remaining. The Red River is the specific waterway to understand in this context. At the start of the week, the Red River, running along the Texas-Oklahoma border and flowing southeast into Arkansas, was at below normal levels. It had room. That room has been filling since Wednesday. By Sunday, the Red River is receiving the compounded drainage from the first and second storm rounds through its entire upstream basin. The streams that feed it from north-central Texas, from the Oklahoma drainage north of the river, from the Arkansas tributaries of its lower reach, all of them have been delivering elevated flows since Wednesday. The Red River's main channel level has been rising steadily. What additional rainfall deposits into the Red River basin through early next week will shape how high the river ultimately climbs and whether it affects communities along its lower reaches. For communities along its lower reaches, the towns near Texarkana, the bottomland communities downstream in Arkansas. The Arkansas River tells the same story from a slightly different angle. The Arkansas begins this week running at below average levels through central Arkansas, as the rounds of rainfall move through the Ozark terrain to its north and the plains terrain to its west. Those watersheds deliver their runoff into the main channel. By the time Sunday arrives, the Arkansas River at Fort Smith has been climbing for 3 days. The input rate is accelerating, not slowing, because the Ozark streams that drain into the Arkansas from the north are carrying increasingly efficient runoff from fully saturated terrain. The gauge stations between Fort Smith and Little Rock will be among the most actively monitored points in the region through the early part of next week. The NWS River Forecast Centers responsible for that basin will be issuing updated projections as additional rainfall from Sunday and Monday enters the equation. The most important concept for understanding what the second and third rounds actually mean is not storm intensity. It is the mathematics of an already responding system receiving new input. When a stream has been rising for several days and then receives additional rainfall on top of that, it does not start the new rise from a normal level. It starts from an already elevated one. That new input does not push the stream from normal to elevated. It pushes the stream from already elevated to a higher level, and the margin between already elevated and the level where real consequences begin is much smaller than the margin between normal and elevated. Less additional rain is required to cross the critical threshold when you're starting from an elevated baseline. This is the physics of compounding storm sequences, and it is precisely why NOAA's forecasters flagged the late week extended window in their early March discussion, rather than treating the event as a single peak weekend situation. The Ozark stream systems, the White River, and the tributaries feeding it from the Missouri and Arkansas Ozarks, the Black River drainage, the streams flowing south off the Boston Mountains into the upper Arkansas Basin, are carrying the weight of everything that fell on those ridges since Wednesday. The hollows drain quickly after each rainfall event, but the main creek channels carry their elevated flows for much longer. By Sunday, those channels are running well above where they started at the beginning of the week. When Sunday and Monday's additional rainfall drops onto the Ozark ridges and moves through those same hollow systems, it enters channels that are already well above their normal level. The White River, which eventually makes its way to the Mississippi near the Arkansas-Missouri border, will be showing elevated levels through the first half of next week in a way that communities along its lower reaches, communities not typically named in national weather headlines, need to be tracking through their local NWS River Forecast Center products. A specific note of honesty belongs here, and it reflects how responsible any discussion of this extended window needs to be. River-level forecasts for systems more than 4 or 5 days out carry real and meaningful uncertainty. The computer models that drive those projections are working with storm systems that have not yet fully developed, systems whose exact track, intensity, and rainfall distribution are still being refined. A modest shift in the storm track for Sunday's round can move the heaviest rain into a different part of the basin and change the river response for a specific gauge significantly. What can be stated with confidence is that the corridor from central Texas through the Arkansas-Missouri Ozarks and into western Tennessee will remain in an elevated hydrological state through the early part of next week, and continued rainfall during that window at any level above negligible adds to a system that is already under active stress. For viewers in these states, monitoring the local NWS River Forecast Center, products directly, not the national headlines, but the basin-specific forecast bulletins is the most precise guidance available, and those products update multiple times daily as the forecast evolves. Here is the question most storm coverage leaves unasked. Why do forecasters sometimes express more concern about the Monday river situation than about the Friday night rain event? The answer is the timeline mismatch between when the sky's most active and when the rivers reach their peak. Friday night is when the rain is heaviest. But a major river like the Arkansas, or a large tributary system like the White River, can take 36 to 48 hours after peak rainfall before it reaches its own peak at any given gauge downstream. The atmosphere and the rivers are not synchronized. Friday night's sky and Monday's river are part of the same event. They are just separated by the time it takes water to travel through the landscape, from where it fell to where it is measured. Both moments belong to the same week, and both deserve the same level of attention from the communities along the path. Dallas-Fort Worth will be extensively covered. Oklahoma City will be in the national news feed. NOAA and the NWS will issue updates that mention the major metros repeatedly. But the communities that carry some of the most concentrated and specific risk in an event like this are often not in the headlines. They are the small towns built close to the water in the Texas Hill Country, positioned in the bends of fast-responding creeks, sitting in the low country between limestone ridges where the drainage naturally concentrates. They are the farming communities in the lower reaches of the Ozark tributary systems in Arkansas and Missouri. They are the river-bottom towns of western Kentucky that have known high-water events for generations. The hill country communities west and north of San Antonio sit in terrain that is well documented for its fast-rising creek systems. This designation reflects a documented geographic reality about how the terrain there concentrates water. A community beside a hill country creek can see that creek rise significantly within 60 to 90 minutes of heavy rain falling upstream. The upstream catchment area for many of these creeks is compact enough that rainfall falling only miles away creates an almost immediate response at the town level. The width of the channel does not give a large visual clue that the volume of water moving through it is multiplying rapidly. The Guadalupe River system, the Nueces headwaters, the Medina and Blanco rivers, these are not obscure waterways. They carry significant histories of rapid rise events, and communities positioned along their banks or their tributary creeks enter this week with that history as their specific context. As move east to the farming communities in the lower portions of the Ozark tributary systems, the towns and agricultural areas along the lower Illinois River in northeast Oklahoma and northwest Arkansas, the communities near the Mulberry River as it moves toward its confluence with the Arkansas, the small bottomland settlements near the lower Buffalo River before it joins the White River. These communities have a different relationship with flooding than the hill country towns. Their warnings tend to come in hours rather than minutes. Their local emergency management can often act in the window between a forecast and an arrival. But the farming infrastructure, the roads that cross creeks, the low-lying fields that back up to tributary floodplains, the equipment and livestock that may be positioned in bottomland areas, does not always have the mobility that a residential community does. A creek that rises overnight in a farming county can close the roads that connect that community to the nearest town before anyone is aware the rise was coming. Those situations unfold quietly and are rarely part of the national weather story. The riverside towns of the Missouri Ozarks occupy a geography that is both distinctively beautiful and acutely flood-aware. Communities along the current river, the 11-Point River, and the smaller streams draining the Missouri Ozark Plateau carry generations of experience with high-water events. Many of them have community-level institutional knowledge about which road will go first, which bridge will become impassable, how high the river typically needs to be before the low road through the hollow is covered. That knowledge is genuinely useful, and it is also earned through repeated experience. The character of Ozark flood events is shaped by terrain, narrow river corridors, high upland on both sides, limited road access in some areas. Towns in narrow river valleys in southern Missouri can see road connections affected within a few hours of a fast-rising creek event if the upstream rainfall is fast and heavy. In a multi-round event where the upstream terrain has already been through several days of significant rainfall, those thresholds arrive faster than they would in a single event scenario. As the storm shifts east on Saturday toward Tennessee and Kentucky, the human story changes in character. The low-lying areas near the small tributary systems feeding the Mississippi near Memphis are dense, urban, and managed by extensive drainage infrastructure. But within that urban landscape there are residential pockets, neighborhoods built close to the Wolf River corridor, communities near the Non-Conner Creek drainage in the southern suburbs, areas near smaller drainage channels that were engineered for typical storm events, but were not designed for the sustained input of a multi-day rainfall sequence. For families in those neighborhoods, Saturday is the relevant day to understand their local drainage behavior, not as a general precaution, but specifically because Saturday's system brings concentrated rainfall to a metro that has its own history with urban creek flooding. In Tennessee, along the Duck River and Highland Rim drainage areas, and further north in western Kentucky, the communities that sit close to the smaller streams feeding toward the Tennessee River are entering a period where their local gauge tracking matters more than the headline coverage. The national coverage will focus on the named cities. The local NWS River Forecast Center bulletins will focus on the specific streams. Those bulletins are publicly available, updated throughout the day, and written by the hydrologists who know these specific watersheds, the way a local physician knows a specific patient's history. For anyone in these communities tracking this week's event, those local bulletins are worth more than any national headline. Here is what forecasters can tell you with confidence, and what they cannot. They can tell you with solid accuracy which watersheds are going to receive sustained and significant rainfall. They can identify which stream systems are positioned to respond most sharply, given the terrain and the pre-existing conditions. What they cannot yet tell you with precision is exactly how high each waterway will climb at any specific point. The peak level of a small stream in a fast-responding basin depends on the exact distribution of rainfall across the specific watershed, the exact rainfall rate at the most critical moments, and the exact behaviour of the storm cells as they move overhead. Some of those details will only resolve as the event actually unfolds. That uncertainty is not a deficiency in the forecast system. It is the honest boundary of what any model can project about a landscape as varied, as fast, and as terrain-dependent as the one this week is targeting. What is not uncertain is that this corridor, from central Texas through the Ozarks and into western Tennessee and Kentucky, is entering a multi-day period of genuinely elevated hydrological stress. The communities that deserve the most attention in that context are often the ones farthest from the camera. There are 3 specific developments between now and Tuesday that will tell the real story of how this week is ultimately measured, not in news headlines, but in whether the storm sequence this corridor is absorbing stays within the range that the region's emergency systems and communities are built to navigate, or whether it presses into territory that demands a different level of response. The first signal to watch closely is whether the storm round arriving Friday night develops with more intensity, more organisation, or more persistence over the Dallas-Fort Worth and Oklahoma City corridor than the current NWS Storm Prediction Center parameters are projecting. The current guidance establishes a clear and meaningful risk level for this window, but thunderstorm events like the one forecast for Friday carry real uncertainty in their precise organisation. If Friday's storm system is better organised than current forecasts suggest, creek responses across northeast Texas and eastern Oklahoma could be sharper and faster than the current guidance indicates. The first signal of that possibility will emerge in the Thursday afternoon briefings from the Storm Prediction Center and the associated NWS regional offices. If you are in northeast Texas, eastern Oklahoma, or western Arkansas, Thursday afternoon is the check-in window that matters most before the Friday night peak arrives. The second signal is whether the Ozark tributary systems, specifically the streams draining the northern Arkansas and southern Missouri Ozark Plateau, begin rising earlier than the current forecast timeline suggests. The White River Gauge network in northern Arkansas and the Buffalo River stations carry the clearest early read on how quickly the Ozark watersheds are saturating and delivering their runoff downstream. If those gauges begin rising on Thursday evening ahead of schedule, it would suggest Wednesday and Thursday's rainfall is hitting the upper watershed harder than the models currently show. An early Ozark stream rise is the forecaster's signal that the compounding scenario is unfolding at a faster pace than the baseline guidance, and it typically leads to an upward revision of the downstream river forecasts for the Arkansas River Basin before Friday night is over. The third signal, and this is the one with the broadest geographic reach, is whether Saturday's eastward movement pushes more significantly into Kentucky and Tennessee than the current Level 2 slight risk designation indicates. A Level 2 is a real and meaningful risk level, but the spectrum above it exists, and whether Saturday's system upgrades toward that next level depends on how the atmospheric organisation evolves as the front interacts with the Tennessee Valley terrain. If the system slows its eastward progression over western Tennessee, if it finds a stall point that keeps its heaviest rainfall over a narrow corridor for an extended period, the totals for communities in the Duck River Basin, the communities south of Nashville in the Highland Rim drainage, and the areas west of Paducah along the lower Tennessee River system would climb above what the current guidance suggests. The NWS offices in Memphis and Paducah are the specific sources to watch for that signal. Their Friday morning forecast discussions will contain the first definitive language about whether Saturday's shift is tracking as projected or showing signs of delivering more than initially forecast. The sources that will give you the most accurate, most frequently updated, and most location-specific guidance through this event are the same sources that drove the analysis in this video. On NOAA's extended forecast discussions, the NWS River Forecast Center bulletins for the Arkansas Red River Basin, the Lower Mississippi Basin, and the Tennessee River Basin, and the Storm Prediction Center's daily severe weather outlooks. All of these are publicly accessible documents, updated multiple times daily, written by the meteorologists and hydrologists who are watching this specific event most closely. NOAA's extended forecast discussion from early this week was one of the most direct and specific official communications about the multi-round, extended threat character of this event. That kind of explicit acknowledgement of duration and compounding risk in an official forecast discussion is not standard language. It reflects a genuine professional assessment that this week's sequence merits sustained and broad attention across the full timeline, not just for Friday night, and not just for the cities in the headlines. This event does not end with Friday night. It carries through the weekend and into the early part of next week, in the form of rivers still responding, communities along the lower reaches of major basins still watching their gauges, and a second and third round of rain arriving on ground and into stream systems that will have already been carrying the accumulated rainfall and runoff from earlier in the week. The full impact of this event, or whatever it ultimately looks like, will be shaped by every one of those rounds, not just the peak cities and states that made the early headlines. Every community in this corridor, from the hill country creeks to the Tennessee River tributaries, is part of this week's story. If you are in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee, or Kentucky right now, drop your city in the comments. I will be monitoring the full arc of this event and posting updates as the picture sharpens, particularly as Thursday's forecast discussions begin to clarify what Friday night is going to look like in detail. Your comment tells me where to focus in those updates, and it also connects you to other viewers who are watching from the same region. If this gave you a fuller picture of this week than what you have found in other coverage, hit the like button. It helps this breakdown reach more people who have family in the path of this storm and have not yet heard the complete story. And if you're not subscribed, subscribe now and turn on the notification bell. The update I post before Friday night is the one that will matter most this week. Make sure you are here for it.